We are now nearing the end of the Cleric series, so this one, I'm ranking them how I see fit. Hey fellow Game Masters, I'm Richard Kleiner. Welcome back to the RPG Daily, your daily dose of all things tabletop role-playing games, helping you build your world and master your game. And like I said, today I'm finally ranking the Cleric Divine Domains in the order that I think they belong in. I'm really just picking my top 5, and here's why. Every Divine Domain has a little special something about it, something, they specialize. They're not a general broad kind of class, of course. We know that about pretty much any subclass. But there are so many of them, there's so many, that it's really hard to pick which is best. So instead I decided to rank these based on which seemed the most fun for me, and which seemed the least fun. And I'm purely basing it on fun. I'm not basing it on numbers or optimization or anything like that. I'm just flavor. That's all I'm going for here. So these are my 5 favorite top domains. But first, let me know what your favorite domain is in the comments below. Let's have a discussion about that. And then also, but after that, I want to talk about my least favorite one. The Divine Domain that didn't strike any chord of enjoyment for me as a cleric was nature. That's right, the nature domain. This one, I think it didn't appeal to me so much because a druid has been on my wish list of characters for so long. I've never got to play a druid in a game for any length of time. So I see this and I look at the nature cleric and I'm like, I'll just play a druid instead. I don't want to play the nature cleric. I feel like I don't need it. That's my opinion. It's very short-sighted. It's very personal. But that's why nature is my least favorite divine domain. Now that the sad thing has happened and people get angry at me, it's fine. It's fine if you're angry about that one. Let's talk about my 5 favorites. And I am putting them in order. So the last one will be my favorite, the one that I think is the most fun, and the first one on this list is my number 5 pick, I guess you could say. So number 5 on this is actually the Forge Domain Cleric. This cleric has a lot of cool flavor to it. It is about creating things, and the idea of being like a priest of a Forge Domain deity is a really cool idea. I do like that. The ability to create items, like creating a heavy suit of armor or weapons, and using those abilities to buff your parties is also really cool, and I do like those spells that just give a little more oomph to the party and create more power. I like that. Especially when you get to the top and you get the Saint of Forge and Fire ability, which reduces your damage intake substantially. You have a lot of really fun stuff in this that can make for some great flavor. I've never met someone who played a Forge Domain yet. I haven't played it. I haven't experienced that. I think it could be an interesting domain to play, but there are others that appealed to me a little more, which is why this one only made number 5. Number 4 is the Grave Domain. Now, I played in World of Warcraft for a little bit. I played a druid, and they had one that kind of had this balancing act to play between sun and moon or something. It's been a while. I don't know if that's what I remember or if I'm just crazy. But the Grave Domain Cleric reminded me of that. As I went down the spell list, and there was a life and there was a death one for everything, and it just carefully walked the line. I thought, for flavor-wise, that could make a really interesting character. Someone who's kind of torn between the life and death, who's fascinated by the death, but also needs to cling to the life because it's what's right, apparently. That interested me in that domain as someone who is a torn and could make decisions in either way. It also, I noticed, you didn't have to be edgy. It didn't encourage you to be this brooding, evil cleric like Death Domain might, but it also didn't encourage you or expect you to be this goody, healing kind of cleric like Life Domain might. Granted, all of this is my assumptions on the domains that I've put on them, and it's not how everyone has to play them. But that's how I saw it, this could walk the line between the two and make an interesting character that could have some flaws, but also could make up for them in other ways, and could just be really interesting to play. And I think the spells and being able to... It gave you the solid baseline of here's life and here's death, here's life, here's death. It gave you that baseline. And if you could, as a player, walk that line continually, You could have a really solid array of like necromancy kind of spells come into play, and you could have some really solid array of healing and life spells. And I think that's really fun. I would really enjoy that in a cleric. Number 3 for me is the light domain. And this is basically all about the fire, right? We've talked about it. Fire spells up the yin-yang. Fire is fascinating. If you were like me, I grew up in an area where I could go camping, I could look at the fire, I could play with lighters. I remember I would sometimes crack open bullets and pour the black powder out on something, and I'd light that on fire because I thought it was cool. I grew up liking to play with fire. This domain would have fit in with that kind of thing. I'm not a weird pyro. I've kind of grown out of the fire thing, grown out of that phase. But I feel like everyone has gone through a phase where fire is the coolest thing in the world. And that is where this domain comes into play. These are the clerics that never grew out of that phase, right? They still love fire, but then they've learned to use it for good. They've learned to use it for their priestly duties. And it's fantastic, I think. The domain spells bring so much damage and so much firepower that it's actually impressive that it's built to be just like a heavy-hitting domain. And then on top of that, you throw in more fire spells with your regular spells, and you're just sitting in it. I also think this opens up to other kind of feats that don't often get played with. Elemental Adept, like I mentioned, is a feat I don't really see a lot of people touching, but they could really play into this as, you know, I do fire damage, that is what I do. I use my Elemental Adept so people cannot ignore my fire damage. And I think it's a really great way to just lean into that side, and you could play it weird. You could be like a weird psycho fire person, or you could be, you know, very reserved. You respect the fire, you honor the fire. You have a lot of different things you can do with it. That's part of why I think this domain would be really fun. Number 2 on my list is the war domain, and this one, you could look at it and say, oh, it's kind of boring. And in some ways it is. It is basically you're a spellcasting warrior, right? But you get your heavy armor, you have your holy warrior kind of thing, you go on your crusades. It's almost like a paladin, kind of. There's something in my mind, like I picture a, you know, heavy armor. I know in the game, I know you start with chainmail, but I really picture like a plate mail sporting guy with a war hammer in one hand, a shield in the other, and he's just blasting people in the face with spells while hitting them with the war hammer just left and right. I think that's a cool image. I like epic things. I like movies that have epic moments. Like I've talked about Lord of the Rings so much. It's epic, right? I like that stuff, and I think the War Domain Cleric is one of the more epic clerics out there. The most epic is actually my number 1 choice, which is the Tempest Cleric. The Tempest Cleric sounds cool, right? Tempest is a cool word. You put anything after Tempest and it's going to sound cooler. But you could also just call it a Storm Cleric, and that also would sound cool. It just brings a lot of imagery in my mind of how fun this thing can be, leaning into the lightning and thunder damage, again using the Elemental Adept feat to really hurt people, and maximizing your damage output in large groups, being that Thor type character that just comes into the battlefield and takes a knee and hits the ground and then shakes everything out. I think that's fun. That rustles my jimmies, so to speak. The other thing I think that is really fun about this is that lightning and thunder has often, in real life mythology and deities and pantheons, has often been connected to the ruler of the gods of the group, or one of the main gods. Gods like Zeus, and of the Roman pantheon you had Jupiter, who was basically Zeus, and then Thor of the Norse pantheons. Like, they are leaders among their deities. They're the ones wielding thunder and lightning as a weapon. They have controlled the storm, and I think being able to distill that, as Wizards of the Coast has done, into a class, into this Cleric Divine Domain, I think it's just sweet. And even though I have, on my D&D Beyond, I already have my Life Cleric, I haven't made another one. Probably my next one will probably be a Tempest Cleric, if I have a campaign that needs some epic lightning action going on. That's what I think about that. So those have been my top 5 domains. I know this one wasn't so analytical, because I really just spent, we did 14 videos on Divine Domains. I've explained every one in depth. So I felt like this one I could have a little more fun and just share my fandom of these top 5s and my least favorite. Those are my ideas. Let me know yours in the comments below. And of course, I've been Richard. Thanks for watching.